So one afternoon a week, they started off by setting up one of their church halls with desks, coffee machine, very important, biscuits, and some people who'd done some listening training.
Church should truly serve our community, particularly the preschools, primary and secondary schools, colleges and universities in our area. Join me and Sarah Lane Cawte, Education Officer for the Free Churches Group and Manager for Education Sunday on behalf of Churches Together in England, as we share lots of ideas on how your church could connect with students, schools and colleges. We also profile Education Sunday as a way churches can celebrate and support everyone involved in education. We hope you'll be encouraged and have your creativity sparked about how your church can connect with your community through education. Thanks for joining us for the Roots for Churches podcast. Here we go.
Welcome, Sarah. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Melanie. It's great to be with you.
We'd like to get this ball rolling by finding out a little bit about you, Sarah. You are involved in education and promoting Education Sunday for the Churches Together in England. But tell me about your particular story. Why are you passionate about education?
Well, I started my career as a teacher. I was an RE teacher in secondary school, in more than one school actually. And then I moved into primary for a while, and I've always loved education. I've always felt it's so important, that contact between people and the way that it just gives you that big picture of what the world is like. And then after a while working in schools, I actually wanted to see things from a slightly different angle. So I got a job working with the Bible Society and managed all of their education work. And since then, I've moved to other charities. So I work with Churches Together in England, and now I'm the education officer for the Free Churches Group.
Fantastic. So you've had your finger in this world through lots of different angles, I suppose, and it's fascinating to be able to see it from all those different approaches. So can you frame for me, why is it important for churches to care about education, to be praying for education? Why is that so important for us?
So as I said, I'm really passionate about education. I think it's vital to everybody, and we never stop learning. We never should stop learning. I think for churches, in churches, we're always learning. So we are engaging in education ourselves once we take part in any of the activities of our church, and it brings us into contact with all sorts of different people. So that's always really exciting. But every church is located within a community, and it's really important for churches to forge links with others in the community. In the past, it might have been a very natural relationship for the church to invite the local school in for services, and that happens in a lot of churches still. And there might have been another link with a further education college or the local university. Nowadays, there are so many competing things that we have to work a lot harder as churches, but we need to do it. We have got people in our congregations and in our wider church families who work in education, who are students, who are beginning their educational journey. And so Education Sunday is an opportunity for us to really show that as churches, we think this is important. But I always like to say, like, a dog is not just for Christmas. Education Sunday isn't really just one Sunday. It's something that really, I hope, will challenge churches to think about how you build those lasting relationships with your local schools, colleges and universities.
So let's talk a bit more about Education Sunday. Can you tell me the history of this day? Is this a new thing that has just sort of cropped up in the last few years? Not everybody will have heard of it.
No, it's not a new thing, and there's a bit of a contested history. I don't think it's one of those hotly contested histories where people fight each other over the right interpretation. The Churches Together in England website fudges it a little bit and says it's been celebrated for over 100 years. The Catholic churches celebrated Education Sunday's 150th anniversary last year. So that's rather different. Well, they fit together, don't they? Over 100 years, 150 years. And I can't find any written evidence or anything about the actual start of it for the wider groupings of churches. But I do know it's been going for quite a long time, and it has changed during that time. The date has changed, for example. So from the time that I've been involved in it, which is probably nearly 20 years now, it was celebrated initially on the ninth Sunday before Easter, and that's I think it's Septuagesima. It's one of those long words that lots of people don't know what it means, and I had to look it up. So it's the ninth Sunday before Easter is the traditional date for Education Sunday, and the reason for that is that in the former lectionary, before we got the revised Common Lectionary, that was the day when you had readings about Jesus the teacher. So it made sense to locate Education Sunday on that date. In more recent years, when the lectionary changed, we still celebrated Education Sunday on the ninth Sunday before Easter. That was always challenging because no one could ever remember the date because it changed every year. And the readings became more and more difficult to make a link with. So rather than I'll use some technical terms here. We didn't want any eisegesis going on where you're trying to read into the Bible and get it to say what you want it to say. We actually wanted to try to find things that spoke from those Bible passages to the world of education. And a few years ago, Churches Together in England held a consultation with its member churches, and it was concluded that actually the beginning of September was a much better time to be thinking about education. And I think all of those, well, all of us have been involved in education in some way. There is that feeling, isn't there, at the beginning of September, the back to school feeling, even if you haven't been to school for 50 years, and even if your job doesn't really give you the opportunity to take a lot of time off during what is the school summer holidays. Obviously, in Scotland, the summer holidays are a little bit earlier, but it is that sense of a start of the school academic year.
Yes, the September feeling. Everybody gets new shoes and new rucksack,
Yep.
and gets everybody ready for. And there's more energy, I think, in church as well. In the September, people are willing to sign up for courses, or they come back to church. There is that back to school feeling. I agree, and so that is a great time to pray and commission. Those who are starting in new school years or new schools, and even those teachers and those who work on staff and the facilities of all of these schools and colleges and universities.
Yeah, there's lots of moving around at that time of year. So, as you say, there are children who are starting school for the first time, perhaps, or there are teachers or lecturers who are starting new jobs because a lot of changeover happens at that time of year. So it is important for us to remember that and to try to support all of those people who are involved in day-to-day activities within our education systems. I think often we tend to forget them, and I think sometimes churches also take people for granted a bit. I think particularly teachers, you know, please don't always ask your teachers to lead your children's activities in church. Sometimes they need to be the ones who are receiving rather than giving. And it's that sort of thoughtfulness that I hope Education Sunday gives people a chance to step back a little bit and say, how are we doing this? What are we doing? How are we helping to support all of those people in our church and our community who are involved in education?
That's really helpful. And so, churches together in England will produce some resources every year to be used on Education Sunday. And Roots has done a spread of resources as well, alternative ideas, creative things that you could do to help commission or pray for. So those will all be available in the September issue, and yours will be out on the CTE website. Is that right?
Yes, in the next couple of months. So we'll give people a bit of a heads up and things will not all appear at once. So we'll keep you waiting for some of the more meaty things. But of course, these resources are really helpful. But as churches, you may well have things that you want to do that don't feature in any of the resources. Actually, I'd love to hear about those because if there are great ideas, share them. And I know that some churches work together on Education Sunday and have a big service. Some cathedrals have in the past, and I think still continue to have a really big service, often on a weekend afternoon, maybe not the Sunday morning service, where they invite local schools and colleges and the teachers and parents and grandparents to come along and celebrate together. And that's always really exciting, bringing people together to celebrate something that we shouldn't take for granted because actually in our countries, in the United Kingdom and other parts of the more privileged parts of the world, we take education for granted. But Education Sunday is also an opportunity to remember parts of the world where education is really for the few rather than the many. And I've always thought about that when I've heard children moaning about going to school. You don't want to say to them, well, you're very lucky you're going to school, because lots of children don't, because that message doesn't get through. But actually, as people in churches, it's important for us to look at God's whole creation and not just that little bit in which we live.
No, that's really true. And as you said, like, churches should be engaged in education, not just one Sunday a year. I think it is so important as churches to help mark these sort of transitions, to commission, to say well done if there's people going off to university, marking that transition, because it is a physical transition, but it's emotional, social, and spiritual. They're moving into new settings where they can be a witness of their faith, where perhaps their faith will be tested, and we want to support and gather around those individuals, whether they be students or teachers or faculty. We want to gather around as a church and say we're with you and we're rooting for you. So I think Education Sunday is a great opportunity to mark that. But as you said, it's not just one Sunday a year, and there will be churches who, upon hearing this, will think, well, how can I connect with the university, the further education college? Maybe they have a link possibly with a primary school, but how do they forge these links and do more to connect with what's going on in education?
I think the best starting point is really to look around at the people you know. So, who in your own congregation or any of the other local churches that you might interact with is in one of those settings? And what can they tell you about the needs of that place? And if you've got people like that, actually, can they give you an introduction to somebody that you can talk to say, okay, we're your local church. What do you need? It doesn't have to be going in to do something that might have a sort of spiritual or Christian label on it. It can be something really simple. Um, and I know one church, which was down on the south coast in a university town, thought, well, we've got space, and universities are getting more and more crowded because they've got so many more students these days. What can we offer? Well, we could offer study space. So one afternoon a week, they started off by setting up one of their church halls with desks, coffee machine, very important, biscuits, and some people who'd done some listening training. So they were able to say to local students, come and use our space. And then they'd have conversations with the students. Sometimes those students were very stressed. They were having an essay crisis or they had exams looming. They were able to offer that listening ear as well as the space. And really, that is being the church in your community.
It's true. And space is sometimes a thing that churches have, whether it's, a big hall to hold an all school assembly or carol concert, or
Yeah,
or just the grounds around the church. I know lots of nurseries are looking for places to do like a forest school or a mud kitchen. And if you've got that space and can offer it, again, those relationships and that connection, that generosity of spirit often builds lots of connections.
yeah, absolutely. And actually, some of the buildings, okay, so I know I can imagine people sitting listening and thinking, well, my building's really boring. It's just a square block. Or actually, we might not even have our own building. But if you have got a building, it doesn't really matter if it's the most elegant building or the most architecturally interesting. But there are ways in which you can use it to build links with local schools and provide educational opportunities within that building. Because if you're perhaps looking at an RE lesson, actually it's far more important for children to hear from somebody who holds the Christian faith as central to their life, than it is for them to really be able to draw a diagram of the church and locate the font.
It's true. And I think it's really great if the kids could walk from their school over to a church and do a tour. I know just seeing it, going inside a building, it's breaking down barriers of people going, oh, I understand this. Maybe the first time they turn up in a church won't be at a wedding or a funeral, but they've been here before and they feel less anxious about it and have some understanding of it. hopefully
Yeah.
communicated by someone who's from the church and is passionate about it.
Well, I've heard some really amazing stories about how people have got involved in their local schools. And sometimes it is a structured thing, um, like going to hear children read, because schools often need people just to be available. It might be putting up displays or something that teachers and teaching assistants run out of time to do because they are so busy. And if you find out where the needs are, they're not always overtly proclaiming the gospel, but actually you are proclaiming the gospel by living as a Christian. So it's that incarnational aspect of offering yourself to a local school for whatever activities they might need help with. So you can do that in schools, and then again, you have the conversations and other opportunities emerge. You might hear that, oh, we are really looking for some extra space to rehearse our school play. Have you got a room at the church that we could borrow? Well, sometimes the answer will be yes. Or we're doing something on different kinds of insects that you find in our local area, and your church might have a rather overgrown churchyard that is an ideal habitat for insects and other creatures. And invite those teachers to come and have a look, find out what they want, find out how you can help them. Actually, a lot of it's quite easy, and I've just heard such good stories from people who've started small and then have had really brilliant relationships growing with their local schools. Um, and I I think with it is different with further education and higher education, but it is also possible to build the links. I've given you one example of higher education where students were using church space. In further education, so your college, where you often see lots of older teenagers, young adults hanging around outside because the canteen's not big enough, because there's not enough space in the library, or simply because they don't like sitting still for too long and they'd rather be wandering around outside. Have you got a space where you could offer a coffee bar? Or have you got someone who is a trained youth worker who could, with permission from the college, be available to those young people for conversations? There are some really good people involved in further education chaplaincy now, becoming chaplains in those colleges who are just available to young people. And that availability is a real gift to the college and a real privilege for the person involved.
Mm. There's so much to be done if we can just be on hand and build those relationships. And that is the key. It's kind of being present to where the young people, the students are. And I know a friend who's involved with sort of food poverty. They run a breakfast club in the church before school, and I know schools offer that for some children. But if you want to offer it, I'm sure there will be many families who take you up on it who might not officially qualify under free school
Mm,
meals, but it would be a huge benefit. And there's other things about food poverty during the holidays. The charity Make Lunch helps churches to get involved, and again, that can be connecting the church and the school. Parenting courses, a lot of
yeah.
schools would love parenting courses to be offered, particularly around school readiness. So,
Yes.
that transition from preschool into reception, or um, different ages, how can you get ready? How can you make sure that your child is geared up and ready to move into that new place? So I think it's the key is maybe don't be shy,
Yeah.
to offer what you've got, but also ask the questions and say, what do you need and can we serve? I think we'd be surprised how many schools would snap at those offers.
And another really lovely one that I've heard of recently as well is having school uniform swaps, or having the community wardrobe. In fact, at my church, that's happening as we speak. The community wardrobe for under 18s, where parents and on the way home from school, they can bring in their children to pick up some good quality clothing that isn't actually going to cost them anything. If they want to bring some clothing that the child's grown out of, they can leave that in, and that will be there for somebody else. But there are a lot of people struggling, and actually being able to go into a setting where it's normalized to just be able to look through, find the right thing for your child. There's not a stigma. There's a cup of coffee. There's some nice biscuits. There's some friendly people. And there's lots of other things going on at the same time. That's the sort of thing that, again, churches are really well placed to do. And it's a great way also to link with your local school, because a lot of schools will have lost property boxes that are overflowing
Yes,
with
they
school
do.
uniform that has remained unclaimed and unnamed for many years, or, well, maybe a couple of terms. And they'd be very glad to have an outlet for that.
No, that's really true. We used to do that at the back of our messy church, and it was a great, context for people are milling around doing messy church things, and people pick up a few items of school uniform or the next size of shoes that they need. Yeah, it's high felt need, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think also thinking about the food poverty aspect of it, um, students at university are often really struggling. Um, when I went to university, I didn't have to pay tuition fees. I don't ever remember being really short of money. And I know that was a huge privilege, and in retrospect, even more so. I don't think you appreciate these things when you're experiencing them. But a lot of students now are really struggling. I spoke to one young woman recently who said, after I've paid my rent, I actually don't know how I'm going to afford anything else.
Wow.
And that's horrible. It's frightening. It's,
Mm,
I think, a very sad situation. She wasn't unusual.
no.
She didn't come from a particularly disadvantaged background. But churches can have a cupboard. Churches have always got cupboards. They're usually full of stuff that you haven't sorted out for years. So this is a good incentive to sort out those cupboards full of things that you don't even know what they are anymore, and have a food pantry for your local students. Bags of pasta, tins of tomatoes. Uh, if you get into conversation with these students and you find that they're struggling,
Mm,
offer them some of that food, maybe in conjunction with chaplains at the university if you've got good contact with them. I've spoken to a few chaplains who actually have got stashes of food in their offices that they hand out, or they've encouraged local churches to give them gift vouchers that they can give to students.
mm.
So there are people on the ground who know what the needs are, and that really is a great way of finding out more, because if you're in the setting, you know the students, you can actually say, this would be really needed. Maybe more packets of pasta, fewer packets of custard creams. But the
Yes,
custard creams are important too.
they are as well. At my university, one of the churches used to cook a lunch um, every Wednesday. It was like a hot dinner, and they probably cooked it for about 200 students who would turn up and have this free meal. And there was often a bit of worship and a Bible study, but no obligation on anybody to stay. It was just sort of if you want to. It was amazing, and they always had a great turnout. One of the ways to students' hearts is through their tummies.
It is. And actually, one of the questions that a lot of students will ask is, why are you doing this? Why are you providing it for nothing, for us? And that's a great way into a conversation where you can talk about why your faith um, leads you to want to serve other people. So it's not always up front, here we are, we're going to do a service, or um, we're going to offer something which is a Christian meeting. Some students will come to that, and that's great, but give them the opportunity to explore more and meet people, because I think that's where the reality is. It's about how our faiths impact the way we live, and
Mm,
that's what we want to share with people.
indeed. And those relationships are the bedrock for people learning about who Jesus is, learning that Christians are safe and interesting people, and being a safe place to ask those questions. And
Yeah.
I do think this is how we connect with community. Often with students, particularly, they've moved to a different city or town. They don't know people, and this is a way of finding people who are not peers. They're looking for older people who could sort of spiritually parent them or nourish them. And we have students in our church who just love being around the young families because they miss that. When they turn up and they're around all their peers all the time, they want to see that intergenerational aspect of church. And so I think there is something about, throw a few bring and share meals or have some jacket potatoes and invite those students along to connect with other people in your church, older people who have different generations, and I think they'd really
And it
like
can
that.
last a lifetime. When I was a student, as I say, a long time ago now, a family at church sort of adopted me, and they'd invite me round for Sunday lunches, and they'd check up on me if I wasn't there one week to make sure I was okay. And I still, I'm in touch with them. I call them my second family, and I
Mm.
see them as often as I can, even though it's quite a long way away. So it can make a really big impact. And that was simply through me turning up at a church one Sunday and talking to some people. So, yeah, there can be some really important and impactful
Yeah,
meetings that can happen. Um, and I think we should encourage that. It's actually the sorts of things you would do just to offer hospitality to anybody.
yeah,
But if you're in a university town or city, you have got a large population of students who will mostly be young people, not wholly young people, but um, or if you've got a local college on your doorstep, you you might spend a bit more time moaning about how much litter they throw over your church wall than trying to think of constructive ways to engage with them. But maybe try turning that round a bit and say, what can we do that will help them find something to do with themselves during their lunch breaks or when they're waiting for their next class or lecture or workshop to begin. What
mm.
can we do?
Yeah, really simple links with just local community. We've had our community support officer from the police come in and they marked bikes so they wouldn't get stolen. They did some sort of clever UV thing that you can do. But again, opening your building up for those kind of settings where students come in, they meet people, they say hello. And again, they've crossed the threshold and they realize these are good people and this is a space where I can access and I might come here again if I need something or if I
Yeah.
want to meet with God.
It's not just that weird building that you walk past and you think, well, what goes on in there? Are they all
Mm.
strange people? You've actually opened it up and shown them it's a resource in the community and hopefully will become something much more significant in the lives of some of them.
Indeed. And I just reflect on the fact that education was often the good idea of the church. So it was often churches or ministers who started schools. A lot of the schools across England were started by the church. And way, way back, public education was started as Sunday schools. The very first Sunday school was to teach those workers who had, the children were working in factories or mines. They didn't have any education, and the church thought we can educate them on a Sunday, and so they taught them to read and write using the Bible. So it's been in the church's DNA for such a long time.
Mm.
This passion for education, to partially probably to equip people to be able to read the Bible for themselves, but also to live fuller lives, to live, more connected to each other, to bring justice. All of that comes through education, and I, it's amazing that the country, the government, handles this, and education is now everywhere. It doesn't matter where you live; everybody has access, and it's been taken out of the hands of the church to some degree. I know churches are still very much involved in quite a lot of schools, but I don't think education should ever come out of the heart of the church. And I think Education Sunday is a really good, helpful way to bring that back into that value, back into sort of central relief, and just reflect we need to be involved. This is important. How can we pray? And yeah, so I think one of the things we need to come back to is it often starts with prayer of God changing our heart, changing us as we pray for these schools and the people that work there and study there, that God would show us how we can serve and how we can make a difference.
Yeah, I always really enjoy collating the prayers for Education Sunday. Obviously, we don't all use scripted prayers, but they can be helpful. And I'm really keen to include a commissioning prayer, which is the sort of fancy name for a prayer that is saying, go out and do this stuff. And what I like, I mean, I've done this in my own church. What I like is when you have different parts of the prayer for different people and you ask them to stand up, because actually it's amazing. By the end of it, nearly everyone in the church is standing because people have got such links with education. You might not think you have, but you might be, if you're not a student yourself or a pupil at school or a teacher or a lecturer or someone who works to support the different functions that schools, colleges and universities have. You might have children, in which case your role is really important as an educator. You might have grandchildren, and don't underestimate how important grandchildren are for support, grandparents, for supporting the grandchildren that they have. Or you might be some kind of adult friend or supporter who doesn't have a formal blood relationship, but can still really be a great support in a young person's life for the whole of their educational journey. So, it's also about us saying, well, God values us and God gives us a task to do in supporting people who are being educated or who work in education. So it becomes something that is owned by the whole church and celebrated by the whole church. And I love that, because God didn't make us to be separate from each other. He made us to be community. And that's one way of celebrating community, particularly as it relates to our role in education. And as you said, Melanie, the church has always really valued education and promoted education. So let's carry on doing that. And Education Sunday gives us that, not just one day, but it gives us a particular day to focus on education, our work within it, and the amazing work that people who are teachers, lecturers, support staff, caretakers, ground staff, administrators, all of those people do to contribute to our communities.
It's such a critical role, and as you say, we as the church need to support it in prayer, but also with our actions. So thank you for this provocation and reminder. And we'll send everybody listening to the Churches Together in England website to have a look at the resources for Education Sunday. And I'm also aware that the Children's Ministry Network is producing a resource about how to help churches host schools in their buildings, and I know you've contributed to that as well. So that will be coming out later in the year, I think September or around the same time as Education Sunday. So we'll post links to that on the Roots website, and if you are interested in hosting schools coming to your church, that is a really helpful resource, giving you lots of ideas and practical tips on how to do that really well and how to connect with schools. So there's lots of resource out there. It's just for people to be prayerful and ask God how he wants us to connect and how he wants us to serve those schools in our area. Thank you for your time, Sarah. It's been great chatting to you.
Thank you, Melanie.
If you're thinking about ways your church can connect with local schools, here are some resources you might want to explore. A subscription to Roots Children and Youth includes weekly outlines for under 5s, children and youth. We have a number of schools who subscribe, using our content for collective worship in classrooms and assemblies. If you're a volunteer or minister going into school, you can also use these resources to plan your sessions. As part of your subscription, we offer 2 free Out of the Ark songs each month. Children will likely already be familiar with these songs from school, and you can use them in your assemblies and in church to create points of connection and familiarity. Roots Discovering God resource tackles various themes like racial justice, angels, remembrance, or spiritual thirst. It's designed for people who are new to faith in non-churchy language, ideal for use in an assembly or in an after-school club, small group, or Christian union meeting. The Children's Ministry Network has developed a resource to help churches of all denominations host school visits to their buildings. You can find this Hosting School Visits PDF on the Roots website as well as the CMN website. You can find that at childrensministrynetwork.org. Roots produces digital and print resources to help you lead great church every week. There is a huge wealth of fresh resources here for you to explore, sparking your creativity and saving you time. All so you are free to do the part of ministry that can't be outsourced, connecting. Visit our website and take out a free trial today, rootsforchurches.com.